Okay, welcome everybody to the May Bytown Housing Committee meeting. I'd like to start the meeting by asking for any additions or changes to today's agenda. All right, I have none. Okay, so next on the agenda, we have our friends joining us from Granicus to discuss the idea of short-term rental regulation in the towns of Dover and Wilmington. So in the sake of time, I will go ahead and turn that over to them. Guys, we did schedule about 30 minutes for this conversation, hoping to have a little time right at the end there for some questions from the group. So feel free to introduce yourselves and get us going.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, so I'm Kyle. I represent the data solution from Granicus Host Compliance. I've been working with communities for since 2016 to help them to address their short-term rental challenges. And I'm actually joined by Jeffrey here. And Jeffrey, if you could introduce yourself, that'd be super helpful.
Sure. My name is Jeffrey Goodman. I'm located in New Orleans, Louisiana right now, which maybe is the opposite of Vermont. And I'm an urban planner and have been working on short-term rental regulations and enforcement systems around the country and in Canada for 6 or 7 years now, working with communities to figure out the best systems that are going to work for their local context.
Great. I had prepared a presentation for today's session. I was hoping, Eric, could you provide me share access? And while we're figuring that out, so oftentimes when we meet with communities, they're typically in the same situation. Are we going to regulate? What are our goals? And that's why we have Jeffrey on here. He's helped hundreds of communities meet their desired outcomes with the regulation best practices that he's seen from working with hundreds of towns and cities alike. Perfect. Thanks, Eric. I appreciate your help. What I'll do, if you don't mind, I'll start by sharing with you the data and just give you a lay of the land on what's going on in the market. And then we'll flip it over to Jeffrey, but would love to keep this interactive, not looking for Kyle and Jeffrey talking head scenario here.
We can do it. We've done it.
Great. So just wanted to share with you that short-term rentals, which are typically the rentals under 30 consecutive nights, often advertised on like Airbnb, Vrbo, and whatnot. Typically, they have different goals than a local government. They want as many people to operate, and for the local government side, typically, they want control over these, right? They oftentimes will have restrictions based off of occupancy or, just to reduce like the impact on housing, which is what we're here to talk to you about today. So just providing you some data and best practices here. What I'll do is I'll flip over to some of the top priorities that we often hear. Oftentimes, again, there's interest in reducing the nuisance type complaints related to short-term rentals, addressing building safety, impact on housing, recovering revenue. When we talked with Eric and Gretchen, it did seem like there was a housing issue in both towns. So happy to share with you, with Jeffrey's help here, some insight on how other communities are dealing with the matter. But if you are seeing any other priorities, please do let us know, as it will affect our the recommendations that we provide here today. Now, in terms of challenges, we're often seeing that regulations don't work because of these things here. What we're seeing oftentimes is that there's no clear goal in mind, and that the rules may be poorly drafted. So with Jeffrey's help and with the data, what we hear is that there's you can come into those conversations more informed, be able to address your goals based off of the data. What I'll do is I'll flip to the next slide here. Now, that's a little bit about the short-term rentals and short-term rental regulation. Just to give you a high-level overview of the platforms now, we are seeing that there's over 100 different types of Airbnb-type platforms. And unfortunately, finding who is operating on short-term rental websites, that's proven difficult. Also, when we enter into a community, typically there's only 10% voluntary registration. So, gone are the days of having to identify these manually. Really, you need a solution like ours to help to identify these short-term rentals when you're trying to get the data to be able to make those informed decisions for your regulations, or be able to enforce them in short order once adopted. In the town of Dover, we had identified that there was 553 short-term rental dwellings as of April 30th. And that's represented by 719 advertisements. So there's 719 listings or advertisements across the 70 plus websites that we monitor, making up the 550-ish dwellings that people can stay in. And what you're seeing here is a breakdown of where they're posting. So the colors delineate the platforms. And then you can see most of them are entire home rentals and mostly single family home versus anything with a unit number. So let me continue here. Now it looks like the amount of short-term rentals have increased in Dover since 2016 by 76%. And I've got an analysis here for Wilmington as well. Okay. So in Wilmington, we saw similar growth. So 347 rental units as of April 29th. And think of those again as dwellings. Again, mostly entire home listings, mostly single family home listings versus anything with a unit number. And then 137% increase since 2016. And then this is where it breaks down where they're posting across the different platforms. So in terms of ways we can help, again, if you're not familiar with Granicus, we're a provider of many things related to local government. So agendas, meeting management, FOIA type solutions, website services, and now short-term rental services. So whether it's regulation consulting or the actual data, we can certainly help. And then I'm wondering, Jeffrey, if I could pass it over to you to provide information on the consulting services, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Kyle mentioned, we often run into communities that are in different stages of regulation. Sometimes they don't have regulations. Sometimes they have regulations that haven't solved a problem or do something they don't want it to do anymore. So I work with Granicus to offer a variety of services to help places figure out what their goals are in terms of regulating short-term rentals, use best practices to inform local decisions, everything from public outreach, running surveys, doing focus groups, all the way to getting an ordinance to adoption. I've worked with communities to do, and it's really up to local governments kind of where they think I would be most useful. So oftentimes the most difficult part is just finding out what the goal is. A lot of times people jump into this process and they're trying to sort out through all the different ways that you can regulate. I think a lot of times that the little bit of work at the beginning, which I've been excited to do across the country to get a goal in mind, has really solved a lot of problems and made it easier to break through sometimes a logjam that is, how do we first move on this issue? How do we get it rolling even to get an ordinance in place? So, my expertise on this combined with the data from the rest of Granicus can help local governments make really good decisions that are based in what's happening on the ground, not just sort of who wanders in at the public meeting and shares their piece.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
Mhm.
And then we also have a citizen engagement tool here should you need to help in gathering the public feedback more effectively through Engagement HQ. So happy to share with you some more information if interested. As for the solution itself, again, it's the data. It's helping you once you have regulations in place, be able to help you with outreach, online registration should you need it, a complaint portal, and should you require it, but often not recommended, a cap on the amount of short-term rental night stays, the rental activity monitoring would be able to provide you that data. So we'd love to open it up, maybe Eric, for questions and the team there. Any questions on the analysis, regulation, best practices, the services? The last slide here is the pricing, but you have this attachment, so I won't go over that in this session here.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Let's open it up. Who's got questions for me?
I would say that one of the numbers that stood out to me, just looking at that data, and is I think very relevant for a housing discussion, is the nightly price. The average nightly price, I think, in both towns was almost exactly $300. So you're talking $900 a weekend, long weekend, Friday through Sunday. If you compare that to local wages, you compare that to the long-term rents, I think you can see where a lot of the pressure is on property owners or people who want to buy property as investments. The money is there, right? The money is there for people, and it creates a big imbalance. And something that we've run across with a lot of communities similar to yours is, these almost existential questions of where are people going to live, right? People who are working people, but not even, the janitors and things, but firefighters. I heard you talking about firefighters and teachers and all these people, where are they going to live? And if people wanted to come and move in and settle and put down roots, they're competing against people who are using that $300 a night price to base what they're going to bid on property. And so we've seen a lot of places like yours need to get more involved in some of the industry here, just to find a way into some of these long-term rental and long-term house purchasing issues. I always make the case that we can't control national interest rates. We can't control the global flows of money. Short-term renting is one of the few pieces of the housing market that local governments actually do have a lot of control over. And so I think it behooves them to engage on that and to use that to think about how to, fit this issue into, I'm guessing, some pretty broad goals in terms of long-term housing sustainability, not just affordability, but just access across the market.
Does Vicky? Yep, go ahead, Vicky.
So this is for Kyle and Jeffrey. Have you worked with towns that are in so many ways joined at the hip when it comes to this kind of situation? And they're two distinct towns, and I'm just curious about how that works out, and how you find common goals, because I think personally it's pretty important because we are one basically resort community in two towns.
Yeah, so some of it does come down to that kind of initial stage of, you don't want to get into short-term rentals, yes or no, right? Which is often how this ends up getting sort of pitched. And I've seen it. I've been in those meetings. It's not pleasant, right? Because there's no compromise there. There's almost nothing to talk about. I think what you ultimately can do is try to establish, how does this issue fit into some broader plan or some broader scheme, whether that's a master plan, whether that's a 10-year plan, whether that's a housing needs assessment, even an economic development plan, whatever it is. having that as the kind of organizing structure often kind of smooths things out, because if you're trying to get everyone to agree, that's not going to happen. We're in the wrong business for that. The goal is so that everyone understands why the rules were put in place. What are they trying to achieve? And oftentimes, resistance that you'd expect kind of dissolves away a little bit if you start off with, here are the statements from our master plan that we spent all this time on. We all agreed on it, 3 years ago. We went through that whole process. How do we live those values in this issue, right? Now you're changing that conversation a little bit from, my neighbor left some, Coors Light boxes out, and now I'm going to, bring a pitchfork to this meeting, to how do we use this as an issue to live these values that are part of our community. Now, if you have places that really disagree, and we've worked with places that essentially are the same, but just want to go in very different directions, whether that's because of politics or who knows what, personal feuds, I don't know. There are a lot of common things that are going to be found in any kind of regulation. Certainly a lot of the operational side is just going to be common, right? I've been in very few places where people push back on smoke detectors, right? I've had someone push back on smoke detectors, but for the most part, people are pretty much the same. So a lot of things are going to be very similar, even if those towns do choose to go in somewhat different directions. I still think that they'll probably head in roughly the same direction. I don't think one's going to be like, you can do whatever you want, and one is going to be like, we're going to do a ban. I think they'll still be fairly parallel. And again, these are not, this is not written in stone. You can think about how different rules could be amended maybe in 3 years or 5 years. I've seen places do automatic sunsets to have that kind of conversation, to revisit it, to make sure that these ordinances are doing what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, well said, Jeffrey. And Vicky, I'm glad that you brought that up, because it was actually, it came up in our conversation with Faison, Waitsfield, and Warren, where we had a conversation with all of them. And while they couldn't agree to regulate it all at the same time, I think they could all agree that they did not have workforce housing. So they are now looking at short-term rentals at that lens, and then figuring out, okay, well, maybe we should prioritize this purely because of that, right? Yeah, well said.
Do we have any other questions right at the moment?
I'm wondering if that you could get into a little bit more detail about exactly how your company, and of course I know that priorities are like how your ordinance is set up and everything, but I think if you could give kind of like a general overview about how you would manage it. And I don't think that some of us have gotten that financial piece. So if you could show maybe that last slide,
Okay.
That would be great.
Yeah, my pleasure. So essentially the solution from the short-term rental solution from Granicus is made up of several different modules. Address identification would be the only required module, and that would provide your team with more improved monitoring and compliance, so that they don't have to search the advertisements to identify clues and try to figure out what the address is. And also, if you were to put in things in your ordinance, like for instance, the requirement for a business license number to be posted on your advertisement, or to only operate in certain zones, or a cap on the number of occupants just from a building safety perspective, right, or septic. Those are things that the solution can help to monitor automatically. So it would provide your team all the evidence and the information that your team would need to go out and enforce that ordinance. So any questions on the address identification before I continue? Okay. So once you have the data, next comes sending out the non-compliant letters to the hosts. And if your team needs help with that, we can do that with compliance monitoring. So we'll do the envelope stuffing, this stamp clicking. We'll include whatever you want to say. And we'll also include a image of their listing ad. We found that very effective at cutting down those conversations, those challenge conversations down short really quickly. So that's helping you with sending the letters. And then often we see that short-term rental compliance is low because it's difficult for hosts to come into compliance. So why not create an online way for them to go register and pay? So that's this solution here, permitting and registration. It's all mobile enabled. We'll match it to whatever, how you want it to flow. It kind of works like TurboTax. It's very difficult to get confused and super easy to pay there. I'm going to skip tax collection because I don't think you've yet adopted a local 1% options tax. You haven't. Okay. So I'll skip that. 24/7 hotline, that's something that could be of value if you're seeking to address nuisance type issues or party houses. So essentially this would reduce the impact on first responders, fire, most of the complaints that happen after midnight. So it would allow the complainant to contact us. We would intake the complaint, ask for any evidence that they could provide. We would actually contact the homeowner to deal with the issue within the time frame that you set. So this works really well if you have a 24/7 contact requirement, a requirement for the host to deal with an issue within 30 minutes or 45 minutes, however lenient you want to be. And then, possibly like a 3 strikes you're out rule. We'll monitor for all of that, and we'll also contact the complainant after that time to see if the issue is dealt with or not. So it creates a nice feedback loop there, and all the information, it's all uploaded into the backend, so your code enforcement officers can see if this warrants further action. So that's a complaint line, and then rental activity monitoring. That's typically a value for the tax auditor. Again, you would only need this if you were to put a cap on the number of nights being rented. So that's the solution. Any questions there on any of the modules? Okay, hearing none. So what I'll do is I'll flip forward to the pricing. And again, it's a la carte. So it's like I describe it as like a Chinese food menu. You pick and choose what you want. Address identification being your rice. It's the thing that you need, and then the rest is all add on. Now, one thing that we discussed, which isn't on here, is should your team not have the bandwidth, Jeffrey has been a value in many communities that I've worked with in drafting regulations. And if your towns are coming at it from the same lens, then it might make sense just to hire him. Again, if you don't have the bandwidth, hire him to just draft the one ordinance and then just scrub out Wilmington's name on it and put Dover, right? And then just perhaps share the costs, and those costs hopefully can get roped into your permit fees. Back to what hosts are charging per night, oftentimes we do see a 2 or 3x is how you would rate your permit typically. So it's not unheard of to charge like $1,200 or $900 or $1,200 for your annual permit for this. Again, they're making that up in 2 or 3, 4 nights there.
Yeah, so I think as far as Gretchen, I see you unmuted. I'll get to you.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
No, I think as far as, kind of our path forward, I mean, we tend to look at a lot of these initiatives and things as a team, just because, we are working on all of these things together and have been for quite a while through our Bytown initiatives. So I think that that's something that we would be, pretty interested in continuing to do. And I don't think it's a situation where we're not trying to get rich off of the people, that are doing this with their properties. The idea of charging $900 or $1,200 to a property is not where my head is at. In my head, we're looking at closer to 1 night of a rental, like instead of 2 or 3 times, because even at that number, Dover and Wilmington on top of the registration fees, would still be looking at 100,000 plus, coming back in off these registrations every year. And we, we've had brief discussions in our housing committee about, using those funds for housing initiatives or possibly creating a trust or things like that. But in no way, shape, or form are we looking to get rich off of, the people using their properties this way.
Understood.
So, we appreciate the advice there and the input, but look, I mean, even looking at these numbers, and the fact that these are kind of a la carte and we can kind of use the pieces we would need and not need, I think that would make sense for, us as two towns talking about this. Gretchen, did you have specific questions about this piece?
No, you kind of like mentioned it. I was, going to ask about, what's the average price per registration that they have seen in the state of Vermont, because I know that you're working with other communities.
Yeah, and again, the goals are going to vary. We have seen it low, right? So again, 1x what the nightly rate is. I think when we were talking to the Mad River Valley Housing, which is the Waitsfield, the Warren, and Face in there, they had expressed interest in upping the fees because they were handcuffed in creating a local tax. I think it was hard for them to create a tax that would go towards more housing development. So their thought was, let's raise the fee for this and then hopefully use that to encourage grants that would help to have the private sector build more housing. Yeah.
And something that else that I think is worth thinking about, and we've seen this more out of say Colorado, also ski towns with very, very intense local housing markets, very difficult housing markets, is using the demand of short-term rentals as a leverage piece to develop more housing units. So we've seen some places, limit short-term rental permits and use that limitation as a way to get kind of an exaction, right? So put some of this onto the private market rather than try to accumulate funds to buy property, to develop property. Seen some places, say if you build a unit, you can get a short-term rental permit if you put another unit or an ADU or something on your property. So there are some interesting ways when you have that kind of demand beyond just kind of permit fees or your local tax to think about how maybe the private market can actually help some of these issues that you care about. So we can also, this is a much broader discussion, but it's something I think worth poking around on to seeing if the financing works, because any unit the private market builds is one you don't have to build.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think our biggest goals in talking about this, I think the money coming back off those registrations honestly is an afterthought, right? I mean, we're not like I said, we're not trying to get rich off of this, and we're not focused on solely using this as a moneymaker. The biggest pieces that interest us or that cause us to continue having this conversation are, number one, making the property owner accountable for what's happening on the property when they're using it as a rental.
Mhm.
And number two, in our eyes, trying to level the playing field a bit with what our local inns and lodges are forced to comply with in order to stay in business and do basically the same thing. I know that these are not on par, with each other, but it would be a step closer, in my mind, to kind of leveling that playing field a little bit, to collect these fees.
Absolutely.
So I will say, we are at our half an hour. Does anybody else have any specific questions for them right at the moment? Vicky, I see you have your hand up.
I have a quick one. After the address identification, which is the way you get into this, can you tell me which of the other services tend to be the more popular amongst communities you have worked with?
Yeah, I think for someone in your situation, if you're just looking to address the nuisance complaints and then level the playing field between different lodging providers. Certainly the hotline, right? That's going to help to improve the response times to the complaints. And then when dealing with leveling the playing field with traditional lodging providers, that's typically then you want compliance, right? So you're looking at maybe assistance in us helping you to send the letters, but certainly the online registration component, right? Just making that really easy. And Eric, remind me, I'm just looking back at my notes here. Are you entitled to the 1% local options tax?
Yes,
Oh, okay, great. Yeah. So then, but that's collected at the state level, right?
correct.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe rental activity monitoring, Vicky, just so that you know how much these short-term rentals are operating, and you know how much the state should be sending to you, and then having that ability to share with the state, like, hey, well, we didn't get this much, so here's the data from Granicus. Go out and get this money. And we've had Barnstable, Massachusetts, actually, they did that. Not only did they achieve 96% compliance within 6 months, but they shared the data with the state and recovered an additional 1.5 million in tax recovery.
So is that your goal, is to recover money for the states?
No, it's typically, so the 400 folks that we're contracted with are the local governments. So we're typically contracted with the local governments, and then now it's whatever they want to do, whether it's to address the short-term rental impact on housing, nuisance complaints, level playing field between different lodging providers, or again in Waitsfield, Warren's case, there, housing.
So in terms of compliance, you're not interfacing with the state of Vermont tax department to ensure that all the Airbnbs are paying the 1%?
Not currently, but if you know anybody there, we'd love an introduction. We'd certainly be happy to help. And I think, we do have one of my colleagues is actively working on state level engagements. We had recently contracted with DC. So we're, actively working on growing that area because it is scalable. And my thought is that we would be able to provide the lower municipalities there with the data now that we've already contracted with the state. But that's still being worked on.
So what are you in Killington as well as Facein, Wakefield, and Warren?
No, not yet. Yeah, so we're in talks with all of them, in fact.
So what do you see as the like the top 3 goals that towns are looking for? What are the goals that they're trying to achieve, like the top 3? How do you see that?
Yeah, and I think it's, I'll flip back to this slide here. I hate to say it, but it depends on the municipality. So, oftentimes it is revenue recovery, Tom. Other times it is just trying to limit the liability on the town, right? So addressing building safety. I think we've seen a lot of shootings or like scares recently with carbon monoxide type, just because of like recent actors who've stayed in not so good short-term rentals. Party houses, that obviously makes the news quite a bit, right? So helping to improve those type of complaints, and then limiting maybe the amount of people who are staying at those houses. But all sorts of different priorities, Scott. Again, it just depends on like where you're at. We've heard of Sonoma County, who they're actually looking to limit the amount of short-term the folks who stay in short-term rentals purely because of the amount of fire and floods that they have. So they, I believe, limit to like 5 people. And their thought is it's going to be a lot easier to evacuate that many than like 25 should anything happen.
So your data is basically all open source?
Yeah. So it's all public. So we're taking the public information that's provided on Airbnb and those type of platforms, so like the pictures and the descriptions, and then comparing that to other public available data. So Google Street View, realtor website, so picture matching oftentimes, and in your assessor data as well.
So we don't have any sense of how heavy a use these Airbnbs are getting, except anecdotal really. But you don't have any data to support how much use they're getting, or the average amount of revenue that they're coming into as a result of doing the Airbnbs or anything like that.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I didn't prepare that for this presentation, but I can email that to you and the team there.
Sure.
We do have ways of estimating that. Part of that is based off of, say, these rentals have calendars. Those calendars will get blocked off when people rent certain things.
Okay.
We have been able to do estimates. It's not exactly as precise as finding someone's address, of course, but there are ways to estimate the potential income, and that comes into play when you're starting to calculate maybe the potential tax revenue that is going to come in. But that is an estimate, and I think we're always pretty clear about
Yeah.
the limitations of that.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
yeah, I was kind of interested in the density and time periods and things like that, but thank you.
Scott, we do have access to a bird's eye view of this right now through our the Bytown Marketing Committee pays for a subscription to AirDNA,
Right.
which does, is not specific to each property, but it does give us a snapshot of specific weekends or weeks or any of that, kind of higher level 30,000 foot data. So anytime that you would be interested in seeing something like that, I'm sure Gretchen can get you into our account to take a look at that information.
Okay.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a really good tool, resource as well. And yeah, Scott, with our data, you would be able to see how much that each operator is grossing. But what Eric shared there, if you're just looking for an estimate, like a high level overview of your market, certainly AirDNA can help with that.
Okay. Okay.
Awesome.
And I believe that AirDNA just does VRBO and Airbnb. Is that correct, Eric?
There was a third as well, but it's not.
Okay.
But AirDNA and VRBO were the larger ones.
Yeah, and I don't have access to that. So
Okay.
I
Yeah, we
yeah.
can get access to it. It's something that
Right.
the towns are paying for, and we're supposed to all have access to it because we actually shut Dover's off when marketing turned theirs on. So we'll get that from Tim. Awesome. Well, guys, we really very much appreciate you coming to talk with us about this topic. We understand anytime you start talking about implementing rules where there previously were no rules, you're going to have some friction, right? So it's, we're just starting this conversation about a topic that's, I believe Vicky used the term "the cow's out of the barn" on this one already, right? Like, so we have to go back and have this conversation after the fact. Whereas if we had it before, obviously it would have been a lot easier to implement. So we appreciate you coming and talking to us. I will act as liaison to anyone on this committee who has questions for Kyle or Jeff. By all means, be sure to get those to me and I can share with them and keep the dialogue open for anybody who has questions they think of after we get done here. Okay. So thank you guys for coming. We'll have probably a bunch more broader conversations about this, and we will stay in touch.
Sure.
Happy to help.
It's a marathon.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right.
All
Take care.
right. Thanks,
Okay.
guys. All right. So Tom, Scott, Mike, if you want to stick around, by all means, you're welcome to. We're just going to finish up our meeting here. I think we will, based on that conversation, maybe we will schedule an additional meeting to kind of have a conversation about if we want to proceed, how we would proceed, that type of thing between the two towns. Does that work for you guys? Okay. A lot of feedback there.
And actually, if you guys wanted to stay on, Eric is going to show the Zing website, and it would be great if you guys could stay on for that.
Okay, I did send the link out to that, dude.
You are going to show it, right?
I am now, yeah.
All right. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Tom, did you have something to say?
You haven't sold me.
Okay.
You have not
Nobody's
sold me on
sold.
any of this. I don't even see what our goal is.
No, nobody's sold on anything, Tom. I think this was literally just a meeting to broach the conversation about it, you know, so that we can.
I understand that, okay? But way too early to have the two select boards meet on this one, I'll tell you that. We're gonna have to take this up individually, I think.
Okay. Just, appreciate the feedback, Tom. Thanks again. Thanks for coming today.
I needed to be irritable today. That's what it was. I want to say, God damn it, I'm coming to this meeting. Okay, all right. Hey, I gotta run.
We love you
Good luck,
too,
guys.
Tom.
Thanks, Tom. Okay. So we're a little behind schedule, so we'll just spend a couple of minutes here because this is something we can actually do as homework and you guys can send to me, okay? So the next item on the agenda is to discuss our website, okay, which is now live on the World Wide Web at deerfieldvalleyhousing.com. What I'm looking for from you guys, and I had sent an email after our last meeting and hadn't heard back from, well, literally anyone. What I'm looking for is for everybody to spend, it doesn't even have to be a ton of time. I know everybody's busy, right? But 10, 15, 20 minutes, okay? And dig a little bit to see what our resources are that we all, as you know, think that we should be sharing from this website, as far as, you know, like housing resources go, rental resources go, landowner resource, or landlord resources go. You know, I think I had told you last time I did a very brief, you know, search and stuck on the ones that I knew about. You know, well, not the post finder rental, but you know, as far as like local, state, federal resources, you know, our local zoning, the state resources, the federal resources. What I'm looking for from you guys is literally just to spend a little bit of time, dig in on the internet and find some information that you think might be worth sharing. If you get information about a class or webinar or something that's going to be available, let me know about it. We'll get it on the website. I think Gretchen's about to tell us about one here in a couple of minutes. But if we can all take that as a bit of homework before next month's meeting, and honestly, like the week before would be pretty great, because then I can take some of those resources and stick them on the website and then share that back with you guys again at the June meeting. It would be great. If you don't have any time at all, that's fine. I get it. But even if a couple of people took the time to do it before next month's meeting, it would be greatly helpful. Okay. Any questions on that piece for me? Okay. See, now we're back ahead of schedule. Now we're cooking with gas. Okay. So the last thing on our agenda for today was that Gretchen wanted to talk to us about the VCDA is putting on a conference on housing. Gretchen, if you don't mind, can you please tell the group a little bit about the VCDA and then hop into this conference that's being offered after the fact?
Okay. So the Vermont Community Development Association has been in existence for, I think, 25 years or so. And they are a nonprofit organization that is all kind of virtual. We don't have like a bricks and mortar or anything like that. And the mission is to provide 2 conferences per year. And I have always gone to these since I started being the economic development consultant for Wilmington. I really got a lot of information from these meetings in the and so they had been, you know, all in person up until the pandemic, and then we did all via Zoom for the last couple of years. And this is our first one that is back in person, which we're all really excited about. I am the treasurer of this organization, just FYI. And so we are doing a conference, and usually they're based around, community things that, where people can get ideas. We've had multiple different topics. And this topic is actually addressing the Vermont housing challenge, local and regional strategies for success. So I think we have, and it's in Barre, it's June 28th, and it's from 9:30 to 4 o'clock. What's that? Is there a question?
I think there was just feedback on the line.
So our keynote speaker actually is Maura Collins, who is the Vermont Housing Finance Agency director. And she is really a compelling speaker. Actually, she's very good. I've heard her before. And then we're going to have a panel. There is a really cool thing that's going on in Barre, actually, with their ARPA funding. And so someone's going to present on that. St. Johnsbury and how they are promoting accessory dwelling units is going to present. And then a rehab rental, this is more like a private developer kind of a situation. His name is Jonah Richard, and he is of Village Ventures. I can't remember what town that's in though. And then there's an Underhill community housing project that's happening. And then lunch. And then after that, a table discussion around housing projects. And then the last piece is a full presentation on zoning for better neighborhoods. And that's kind of like the bylaw modernization grants that are happening around the state. And best practices for that. So, and I think that's it. I think we're also talking, we're finalizing the agenda actually. And then of course, resources is the last one, sorry. So like Vermont Housing Finance Agency, Vermont Housing Community Board, Mad River Valley Housing Coalition, USDA, and the Department of Housing and Community Development will be there. So those are all things. So if anybody would like to go, I'm obviously going. And if anybody would like to go, that would be great.
Gretchen, if you don't mind, and when it's when it is available, just go ahead and kick me that information, and I'll get it up on the website, number one, because we have that awesome place to share this information now. And number two, I'll get it out to this group specifically, so that if anybody from this committee is interested in going, we can get them the information as well. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Registration doesn't open until the 15th. So.
Okay. Perfect.
Where is it in Barre?
The Elks Lodge. Elks Lodge. Yep. And registration includes lunch.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, Gretchen. Okay. Anything else from the committee now?
I just have a quick thing, and I always forget to put this on the agenda because the Housing Coalition meets the day before at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So we met yesterday, and I just have a couple of things. So Wyndham Regional Commission was there actually, and they did a presentation on ARPA funding and how to use it for housing. And, really good information. The bottom line is when you're using this for housing, yes, there's a lot of things that you can do with it, but it all comes back to that income sensitive person that's going to be renting those units. And that kind of is what throws projects off, because when we talk about workforce housing, those income levels, and especially with Mount Snow now paying $20 an hour, it skews and it throws you out of that project. Like you can't use those funds. Even, for ARPA, you can use municipal water and sewer. But it would be really interesting to, when you really dive deep into this, how people are going to be using those funds, because we have so many people that are raising their, their wage. And so who's going to be able to live in these homes, afterwards? So,
Gretchen, real quick, do you think anybody, are they thinking about changing those parameters with that, with wages going up? Or that'll stay the same?
No, this is set by the federal government. Yeah, it was voted on, that these ARPA funds came available. They were voted into like March of 2021. And of course, a lot of the incomes hadn't raised at that point. So they're still going by those guidelines.
Thanks.
Scott, maybe you know more, or Vicky.
I'm sorry, and you just have to tell me what the point was. I'm sorry. I lost track.
So no, on ARPA funds, we were talking about the wage disparity. Like, so the majority of these projects, when it comes to housing, is that you have to rent those units to people who are income sensitive. And so do you think that there's going to be flexibility? Have you heard with ARPA that we would be able to, that they might raise that income level?
Yeah, that I don't know. That's completely out of my lane.
I was going to say a lot of these people who are working at, say, the mountain, other businesses in the valley, they get laid off because the businesses close or slow down extremely. And people who are local, they may have families, so they still could be, I think, eligible when you take their year-round income, which isn't going to be $20 an hour, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. I don't, so I wouldn't say that I don't think it would be impossible for people to probably still qualify.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the missing middle, that's what we were calling it yesterday, is really, that's what our need is here. It's really not low income.
Right.
So.
But these projects, if they're using federal money, don't they normally, isn't there a percentage that's available to the income sensitive, and then it's tiered up, isn't it?
That's not what I heard yesterday, but
Okay.
I might not have had my ears on yesterday.
It's a good subject for your roundtable in Barre.
Yes.
Gretchen, thank you for bringing that up with us. All right, so our next meeting is going to be Wednesday, June 8th at 3 p.m. If you have agenda items for that, please get them to me the week prior so I can get those on there. And like I said, if we can just take a look at some of those resources that we think we should be sharing on that website, it would be greatly helpful to me. Okay, anything else today? All right, I will go ahead and stop recording.